glass ceiling-like? Vulnerable? Invisible? Untouchable? What if it is right there, right above your head, though you can't see it or touch it or break it? More commonly known as limitations, this glass ceiling imperceptibly hangs over us and corners us, bears an unbearable weight. Yet we are not born to be limited. I'm now showing you the process of how a limitation is born from a very figurative perspective. Let's start from mathematics. In a typical composition function, f(gx), its basic function gx is constrained by the external function fx. For example, what do you think of the function y equals sine pi x to the power of -1 in your mind? It's okay if you don't know where to start with. Oftentimes, we find ourselves limited when faced with a complex equation that we are unacquainted with. Just like a customs officer never knows what's inside your bag before they open it, we never know how a composition function develops if we see it as a whole. But once I unpack it, it can be separated as a basic function gx equals x to the power of -1, as well as an influential function fx equals sine pi x. Here is the image of our basic function, which plays the role of independent variable in f(gx). Now, I'm drawing the influential function on the vertical axis, which represents the value of f(gx). When the basic function is limited to the influential function, it forms the composition function, f(gx). I developed this original process to keep track of and analyze the growth of our basic function, because restraint from external functions causes certain deviations in its track. For instance, sine pi x is a periodic function, and therefore gives rise to myriads of cycles in f(gx). However, the acceptable adjustment does not mean saying goodbye forever to an old friend, or meeting a completely new face. Notable characters will remain the same, even after adjustments. You see, as the basic function gx gradually decreases towards 0 as x increases, f(gx) still shares the tendency to meet the axis with the original function. Limitations are not definitions, yet they all have an impact of different levels on the side and the final appearance of the function. Processing and analyzing the composition function in the form of f(gx) seems easy, but when applied to practice, what we have to deal with might be... I'm not joking when I say I'm not just talking about maths, because restraint from external functions lies everywhere. Look around you. We're all independent variables constrained by numerous layers of limitations, as if living in the innermost of a matryoshka doll that reality takes in and displays on the stage of everyday life. In the face of numerous glass ceilings, we could sometimes be stressed and don't know what to do. Sometimes people are accustomed to limitations, and they lead an unbearable life. A glass ceiling holds over you and cannot make you breathe. Have you ever been told smiling too much makes you not sincere, or smiling too little makes you look depressed? If so, how did you react? Did you actually cut down on smiling and behave like a lady, or still laugh freely like ever before? Different answers lead to different paths. Trying to suit something results in a minor deviation in behavior, while staying in the current condition reserves your nature. People accustomed to limitations lead an ultra-steady life, just like a frog down a well. Pay no attention to the blue glimpse of sky overhead. Their isolated life and a lack of desire for news have developed a rather resigned nature, limiting their insight from generation to generation. Sometimes we humans also live like a frog down a well, and small satisfaction at present too often bears long-term benefits. When faced with a vast unknown world, we would rather cling to our old opinions instead of trying new ones, which often leaves us with a messy life. Adapting too well to some degree means loss of one's character. When your independent variable gx degenerates into a simple x, a single change in environment may completely remodel your life, which is often extremely dangerous. Limitations are not definitions, and limitations are not just abstract concepts. Though invisible, untouchable, unbreakable, or even sometimes, they're still there, and imperceptibly hangs over us and corners us. Thus, I prefer to describe it with the phrase, the glass ceiling. If a person's course of life is like a composition function fgx, you are the change in x inside. Inner restrictions, like morals, deciding one's basic function, are usually mild but more lasting, while external limitations often reflect immediately through the influential function, both of which contribute to the expansion of the glass ceiling overhead, and imperceptibly hangs over us and corners us. Limitations boil down to two sources: inner voice and the outside environment. One's inner voices, including one's mindset, disposition, and standpoint, form the first layer of the glass ceiling. A typical example of a passive reaction towards limitations and the consequence it brings is the frog that lives down in the well, which I mentioned earlier, that was stuck in a short-sighted mindset and therefore missed the beauty of the blue glimpse of sky overhead. Their isolated life and the lack of desire for news have developed a rather resigned nature, limiting their insight from generation to generation. The world is big. Would you be a child stumbling in the dark, yet still trying to see through its varying deeps of mist? Or a frog down a well? Pay no attention to the blue glimpse of sky overhead. Whether there is another way of living this life or not depends on our attitudes towards it. Then it comes to the environment that causes immediate change. Despite the courage to fight through everything that presents itself with an obstacle, we are still passively limited to difficult external conditions. My grandfather spent his early years on a farm, where most of his playmates were farmers, and a dream of becoming a doctor seemed to be too beautiful and too fragile. But he was the best at school, and he was confident to dream big. He could have had the chance to fulfill his ambition, but when he graduated from high school, the Cultural Revolution broke out. The regular access to enter university was damaged, leaving him no place to bargain and no place to beg. But in the 5th year, during the 10-year revolution, a university invited him to come. But by then, he was already a father, which pushed him to earn a living and support his family. He was finally forced to give up his early dreams. My grandfather's course of life could also be recorded and analyzed with the function y equals sin pi x to the power of -1. Its basic function demonstrates the damage intensity of the Cultural Revolution as time went by. When limited to the glass ceilings, it forms the composition function, my grandfather's later life. Now you see the risk. You might think that it isn't really worth it to try so hard without getting anything after all. Well, that's not the whole view of the entire picture. My grandfather continued to educate himself through reading and worked from a common worker to the leader of a bank. And his kids all graduated from universities. Although he didn't break the ceiling at time, can you see a clear crack on its surface? Avoiding danger is no safer in the long run than outright exposure. How tightly the glass ceiling corners us depends on our attitudes towards it. Limitations are never definitions. Only dead specimens are those who are defined. But remember, we are not walking dead men. There is always a way out, as we are made of unstoppable energy. So before we set out, spread out your hands and look into your palms. Besides unstoppable energy, what do we have left to equip ourselves, since a body of flesh and blood easily gets hurt in this tough battle? Hammers. You'd better not miss 2 hammers in against the glass ceiling. Well, the first hammer against the glass ceiling is conscious activity. Take your action after careful consideration. I always believe that the only way to free yourself is to be the best of yourself and walk a path out if there isn't a path yet. If you're alone under some difficult circumstances, the life story of Artemis Gentry's a great female artist of the Italian Baroque period, who took brushes as weapons and bravely defended against justice and an innocent reputation, will probably resonate with you and remind you that it is you who drive yourself forward like baby, not the other way around. So act with purpose to set free from internal limitations, not with hesitation and regret. The second hammer against the glass ceiling is the power of the glimmer of light. One glimmer of light is faint, but when glimmers of light are gathered, they can generate enormous heat. Perhaps the perfect example for the power of the glimmer of light is the feminist movements pushing for women's rights 100 years ago. Women went together to change and shine, as a result of which, today in most countries, every little girl born into the world has the equal chance with her brothers. However, this is a lovely picture, but not the whole picture. Are you aware of the proportion of women CEOs at Fortune 500 companies? 50%? No. 40%? No. 25%? Well, the answer is only 15%. Though I am eager to make the world reach gender equality as soon as possible, I know that Rome was not built in a day, and liberating women from a glass ceiling called gender inequality still needs our continued efforts. Just as Winston Churchill once said, success is not final, failure is not fatal. In the face of numerous seemingly unbreakable glass ceilings, it is the courage to continue that counts. When you're finally able to push down your own wall, you'll see that glass ceiling doesn't even exist. You'll find it really worth it to punch it in the face. You'll feel it unbelievable to be a happy independent variable, liberated from numerous glass ceilings and influential functions. At long last, the glass ceiling has to be broken. The glass ceiling must be broken. That's all. Thank you. Thank you for listening. I hope everybody can break their own glass ceiling and be a better